can only imagine when that day comes. Psalmist comes to verses 11 through 13, and he's talking about dealing with his adversary. He's asked God to deal with them. He says, do not slay them, or my people will forget. Scatter them by your power and bring them down, O Lord, our shield, on account of the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips. Let them even be caught in their pride. And on account of curses and lies which they utter, destroy them in wrath, destroy them that they may be no more. That man may know that the God rules in Jacob to the ends of the earth. Selah. Think about it, he's saying. Okay, can you put stuff like that in the Bible? He's asking the Lord to spank those people. I think personally that we need to rediscover. We don't want to be vengeful, and he's not being vengeful, but he's dealing with some wicked people that are trying to upend, to circumvent the will of God. And Israel at this time has a unique covenant with the Almighty and promises that he made to them. And so David's asking, if it's David, I think it probably is, asking that the Lord make good on that. And so he begins this imprecatory section, asking him to bring upon these enemies the curse of judgment. And the prayer is really more about God's glory than about the psalmist's grief. He says, do not slay them, or my people will forget. I found that interesting, that he doesn't ask for immediate destruction, but for them to be spared so that they can become an example for God's people. You want to act like these folks? This is what happens. I don't know if anybody was listening the 14 times that I've said it recently, but when you look around and people concerned about problems, social problems and ills that we're dealing with in our society, and you look around and see those things, I cannot help but point out this is what happens when you turn your back on God. It's happened if people ought to be required to study history, brethren, because you would know that, going back thousands and thousands of years, if you act in this way, these things are going to follow. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but over time, that's going to have a predictable impact. In fact, the psalmist, of course, he knows that, and he's asking the Lord to just let that play out as an example to his own people. You come to verse 13, and it looks forward ultimately to the final day of judgment. You know, there are days of the Lord throughout the Old Testament that are not the final judgment. Just in that generation where he makes corrective moves. But there is a great day coming that's going to be when all things are going to wind up. He said, destroy them in wrath, destroy them that they may be no more. Aching for God's cause to make progress and his people to be vindicated. He prays for the removal of wickedness that he's seeing around him, and that he's doing everything he knows how to do to counter it, but it's in the ascendancy. It's on the way up. And so I identify with a psalm like that, because I spent my whole life trying to make the world better. As near as I can tell, it isn't much better on a worldwide scale. We've got now over 60 schools, extension schools, where we're preparing gospel preachers. Most of those guys are young, and so we look for them hopefully to spend 50, 60 years in the field declaring the gospel of Christ. And have high hopes for that. But having, seen what I've seen, and maybe that's just me, but it just looks like culturally, and then we've seen the church embrace a lot of things that they didn't get out of the Bible. Where'd they get it? Man, got it from the sectarians. Oh, wow, that's neat. And it may be. I don't know that I don't want to get off at a big theological discussion about this, but, if we'd put a Starbucks kiosk out here in the foyer and what have you, there might actually be 2 or 3 people that come as long as it was free as a result of that. But I heard Leroy Brown, the old Texas preacher, he said one time, he said, "Brethren, now listen to me. Whatever you catch fishing with sectarian bait will not be worth carrying to the house." Said you just have to throw it back. And there's a lot of truth to that. So the imprecatory part of the psalm looks forward to this final day of judgment, and he's calling for that. And his main purpose in such praying becomes evident. He prays to the Lord that men may know that God rules in Jacob. He's referring to Israel, and to the ends of the earth. And so he's doing what he can do. He's asking God, who can do a lot more, to come on in and make himself manifest. And I just want us to, as God's people, realize it's long since time to rise up. And I don't mean go out and be haughty or belligerent with people, but to declare the truth and live the truth and not apologize for the truth. You have a lot of folks that say, "Oh boy, if you say that, somebody might get mad." If you speak the truth, it's going to make some folks unhappy. If they're in the devil's camp and they're pursuing the devil's goals, then truth is not going to be something that they appreciate. That doesn't or shouldn't affect the decisions that we make at all, because we should declare. I want to, and I hope you do too, when I stand in the judgments of God and look upon my Creator, I want to be able to say, "My Lord, I have not shunned to declare the whole counsel, your whole counsel to your people." And coming to the part of life that I'm in that weighs on your thinking. And so he prays it. Earlier, he had purposely prayed that judgment of the wicked would be gradual, not immediate. Verse 11, just gradually building up. You hope when negative consequences result that people will correct themselves, right? Now, my sister, y'all don't tell her that I said this. When she was a little toddler, she got to biting on the electric cord. And I tell her, "Mom and Dad, Lisa, don't do that. That'll hurt you." Well, guess what? She got a tooth through there and got a jolt of 110. So when I came home, that little thing was waiting at the door and caught my hand and led me away from over there. Of course, I hadn't been chewing on the cord. But she's probably 60 years old now, and I bet you she hadn't done that since. So you hope sometimes some of those kinds of occurrences that are not fatal, are not that kind of devastation, but they are such that they reprove a person and they see, "Oh boy, that's not a good way to go," and make corrections. So he's been asking for that God would manifest that, and that the power of the Lord would progressively become more evident to the righteous as well as to his adversaries. These mighty acts of God would encourage the godly people. And when they see them, they'll remember that the Lord faithfully goes before them to combat evil in response to his people's prayers. That's what the psalmist sees, and the just judgments of the Lord are instructive for the nations. The whole world must know and will know ultimately that you cannot taunt the God of Israel. You can't do that. That's a fool's errand. The one who rules to the ends of the earth. When God acts on behalf of his people, then his deeds will declare who the sovereign is, and it's not man. It's not the United Nations. It's not our president. It's not anybody else's president or prime minister. It's the Lord. He's never relinquished his position as the supreme authority in the universe, and he still is. And his deeds, when he shows them, demonstrate who's in charge. He is the shield that provides protection to those who submit to him. And then he calls for, think about this, Selah. Then verses 14 and 15, he goes back to that dog image again. They return at evening, they howl like a dog and go around the city. They wander about for food and growl if they're not satisfied. You get a pack of hungry dogs and they will revert to something other than your child's lovable old pet. They can go, and some of them, of course, more prone to that than others are. And dogs were not kept as pets in Palestine. They were scavengers for the most part. And boy, to call somebody a dog is in that part of the world would probably still get you in Dutch. He said they return at evening and growl like a dog. That figure is used in verse 6, and he now picks it up again to picture evil men continually terrorizing the community, just like a pack of dogs. And we've probably all seen some film footage of thugs jumping on somebody, 3 or 4 of them at a time, taking their car away from them, beating them up. They go to the bank and get some money. And of course, those guys spot somebody. They know how to spot people. They're not paying attention. And some that, that they think they can win. They can overpower them. And so, old pack of dogs that do the same thing. We've also, heard about down in Houston, people got 4 or 5 pit bulls and they jump on some little kid or somebody because that's in their nature. And so he said, these guys are like that. He further says they wander about for food and growl if they're not satisfied. No, their appetites, their desires are not easily satiated. They are ravenous, and every evening they're on the prowl, and they're howling and growling and carrying on. They don't look up in faith to their Creator, asking Him to provide for them. Various passages reveal that God's people can be as brute as the beast of the field. Exodus 15:24 be an example of a reference. And so what we see about us, or what I see, and I know you do too, is somewhat disconcerting, some of it. And it's going progressively that way pretty rapidly. And you see those things, but there's nothing new under the sun, like Solomon said. This is a long time ago when these events are occurring. He says, praise God for the future, however. Verses 16 and 17, for as for me, I will sing of your strength. Yes, I will joyfully sing of your loving kindness in the morning, for you have been my stronghold and a refuge in the day of my distress. O my strength, I will sing praises to you. For God is my stronghold, the God who shows me loving kindness. So emerging from this part of the prayer is the confidence of a righteous man in his God. And praying is one matter, but it's another matter to trust the Lord when things are not as we would have them. That's a difficult task. And sitting around the room, I can look at people that have been there and done that over the years. Major surgeries, major illnesses, losses that come in a world broken and marred by sin. And so to pray, that's important. To trust the Lord, following that prayer. Trust motivates us to pray, and praying motivates us to trust. And so we need to be acquainted with that. We need to always practice that. Verse 16, his enemies snap at him and move around to find opportunities to destroy him. If you've ever seen a pack of wolves work, they're formidable animals. and they'll begin to circle. Even if it's a pair, a male-female pair, a lot of times the male will attack from the front and the female will come from behind. And they are scary creatures when on the prowl like that. And he says, enemies are like that. But it's for me. He says, I will sing of your strength, speaking of Jehovah. The person who has known the deliverance of the Lord sings about it privately and publicly. You know, one of my best friends came up, he's gone now, but he reminded me of something. He said, I can remember hearing your dad sing spiritual songs. They lived about 3 houses down from us, but he had a powerful bass voice and a pretty good range, and he loved to sing. And so, particularly if he got in the shower, you're going to get a concert. He never could take that on the road, you know, because the clothes were not appropriate for being out in public. But the psalmist is going to sing of the Lord's loving kindness. We do in a lot of our songs, don't we? Sing of his power and his strength. Sing of the confidence that we have that he can keep our souls. And the Lord's people sing every morning of the new supply of grace that's been given to them. I try hard, and I think you probably do, but if you don't, start. Thank God for every day. Every day. Live in the present. That's where he lives, in the eternal present. And thank God for the grace that brought you to today. And he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to allow that, but he did do it. And since the Lord's love flows daily to those that serve him, the righteous man's song of gratitude is new in the morning. And the noise of evil at evening and the groans of affliction are exchanged for shouts of redemption in the morning. I know from years of sitting with people that are gravely ill, a lot of times they get a bounce in the morning. And I've never heard anybody medically explain that. When it goes getting dark, if they're going to have a sinking spell, you'll see it then. But when that sun begins to shine, if they're going to perk up, they'll do so. Seen it a number of times. And so this psalm of lament ends with a song of confidence. He started on a note of complaint, verses 1 and 2, asking the Lord to protect him, set him on a high place where his adversaries couldn't get to him. And it concludes on a note of celebration because the Lord is his fortress and his strength, and his stronghold and his refuge. And his faith assures him that he will experience deliverance and vindication through his God. In verse 17, he begins his rejoicing in what God does for him. Before he ends his prayer, he sings, "O my strength, I will sing praises to you." God's servant here does not wait till the battle's over and the victory's won. He praises God in the midst of it because he has confidence in the Lord. And God does at times, we know, allow us to be tried by fire for one reason, to strengthen us, sometimes to discipline us because we've made bad choices, but he never permits his pure people to experience defeat unless they turn away from him. You know, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, for there no temptation hath overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And I will not suffer or allow you to be tempted above that which you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. That's a promise. Now sometimes, Elvis Presley song, you know, he was talking about that very thing, and he said, Lord, this time you gave me a mountain. He's given me a couple of mountains, and probably everybody here has. But we've weathered it. We've all come through it. And we'll come through it again as long as we don't turn our back on him. Questions or comments to this point? Anything that... Exactly. He don't care about you. He's not going to do anything for you. One of the things that is always amazing to me in Scripture is that you'll see a lot of prophetic presence. What in the world do you mean? I mean, prophetically, God's servant will pronounce the outcome that he desires as if it's already present because God has made the promise. And over and over you see that great men of faith, men like Abraham and Isaiah, Jeremiah, different ones in different generations facing different sets of problems. But when God made a promise to them, they endured because they knew that sometimes He fulfills His promises over generations. He's not on the same time schedule that we are. It's a different thing, and yet kind of the attitude is sort of the same. I had a friend, old Jim, he said, I'm an uptight white guy. And he goes out to the Indian reservation, not that one, but Navajo, I believe is where he was, and going to preach, or there's an Indian brother going to preach. Said he's an hour late. Said, I'm about to blow a gasket. And then it dawns on me, I look around and said, none of the Indian brethren going anywhere. He shows up, drives up, and walks in, doesn't apologize for being over an hour late, and they have the service, go right on. But he said, they don't operate on the same time schedule we do. Well, he said he found out that some of them walk a number of miles to get to the assembly. And so that you have to accommodate the different things that would hamper a person like that. So they just wait till everybody gathers. You can't do that here, can you? And I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just saying God's timing and ours may not be exactly the same. In Psalm 60, if there's anything else, just jump in there. In Psalm 60, he has, these titles are very old. We don't know, it's not part of the text, but they're quite ancient. And he says he describes this psalm as a lament over defeat in battle and a prayer for help. For the choir director, according to Shushan, Eduth, and Miktam of David, to teach when he struggled with Aram, Naharaim, and with Aram Zobah, and Joab returned and smote 12,000 of Edom in the Valley of Salt. Who remembers who Joab was? Well, he was the one thing about general. He is David's primary commander. He's the one that did away with the boy that rebelled against his daddy because he became a threat to the kingdom. And Absalom paid with his life. Joab, he's going to take care of the king. That's his job. Yeah. And so, but he was a piece of work. The title contains that long, complicated historical note, and there is an apparent, and it's only apparent, but there is an apparent difference between what some of the historical records say and what it says right here. But what happened was those other records describe the ultimate victory that David won. Here in this psalm, he's dealing with some, battles don't always go your way, do they? You're involved in warfare, and there's ups and downs with it. You'd like to think you can run in there and and deal with it decisively and be over with. That's better for everybody in terms of loss of life and destruction of property and all that kind of thing. But it seldom works out that way. You know, when one bunch jumps on another, all of a sudden those other folks fight back. It's kind of like when the Russians jumped on the Ukrainians. I don't have a dog in that fight, but I'm just saying it's clear that on the Russian side, they thought they'd just walk in there and walk over it, and that would be that. They didn't count on the United States and Europe entering in that. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. Well, that's just the way of warfare. Bad way to settle argument, but men keep doing it. But that's what happens there. And these various individuals, Aram Naharaim means Aram of the two rivers. And so that must refer to Mesopotamia or Syria, one. The term Aram Zobah or Aram also refers to some part of Aramea or Syria. And so the language in the title and Joab return seems to imply that these conquests were achieved, not all of them by David in person, but as his army moved. You know, he can't be but one place at a time, right? And so that's some of it, but the victory goes to the king, of course. And so we'll jump from that. It's a national lament song prayer written about recovery of Israel after they've suffered some discouraging losses on the field of battle. I don't know how many of you saw the movie made about General Patton, but you remember they were locked in a really bad situation, and the weather was terrible. And he asked, as the movie portrayed it, for a chaplain to write a prayer. And the chaplain did write a prayer, and they had clear weather, which they desperately needed. And the movie showed, General Patton saying, "Get that chaplain. I want him riding with me because he stands in good with the Lord." Because that weather was clear. And I think that may very well have been something that took place. But as the psalm begins, the first 4 verses offer up prayerful penitence. "O God, you have rejected us. You have broken us. You have been angry. Oh, restore us. You have made the land quake. You have split it open. Heal its breaches, for it totters. You have made your people experience hardship. You have given us wine to drink that makes us stagger. You have given a banner to those who fear you, that it may be displayed because of the truth." Selah, he says. Verses 1 through 4 contain really the heart of the psalmist's lament. A distressing and even agonizing experiences can come to God's people, can't they? See, I've known all of you long enough to see you struggle. Just like we've struggled. We've all struggled along together. But the fact that we bear allegiance to the Lord doesn't mean that there won't be any difficulties and any trials. And these can be times when they drop to the bottom, possessed by a feeling or a realization that they've been abandoned by the Lord. Of course, he's not going to abandon us unless what? We abandon him. Because he doesn't move. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. I said he dwells in the eternal present. He doesn't move. And so if anybody's separated from him, that was the choice they made. I hate to see people make that choice. But you can't make somebody do something they don't want to do. God could, but he won't. He created man in his image. He didn't want a bunch of little automatons, little robots. He wanted somebody like him who could choose. He wanted them to choose freely to walk as he walks, to walk in the light with him. And that's what he's working hard to effectuate. And so those times come, and most often they come as outcroppings of disobedience to God's will, lack of focus on God's will. They descend because of a person or a nation's stubborn desire to fulfill selfish ambition and going to do what they want to do. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's hard to teach somebody that knows everything. Sam's educated all his life. And some of the rest of you. It's just hard to help somebody that knows everything. Of course, I'm being somewhat facetious. Nobody knows everything. When I have the opportunity and the honor to teach a group of students, I assume that I know more about the subject than they do. If I don't, if I didn't, I wouldn't have any business being in the front, would I? So I don't waste a lot of time saying, well, you ought to know this or whatever. I take them where they are, and I have some things I want them to get, and I try to take them there and encourage them. And one of the things I like about being in Latin America is people there still regard the opportunity to do college level work as a great privilege. And so they typically, now not always, but typically they jump on it. They're very serious about it. It seems like the further south you go, the better that gets. But that's just one man's observation, so don't take that as law or gospel. These people have come away licking their wounds. Oh God, you have rejected us, you have broken us, you have been angry. And so they're licking their wounds. They took a thrashing in battle. And they know that he had promised to be with them, so if he wasn't with them, there was something. You remember Ai, what happened? By any chance? He told them, go in there, and it's dedicated to the Lord. Don't take any spoil from it. And what happened? One guy saw some things, and he had sticky fingers. And so they when they went to battle it the next time, they got run slap out of the country almost. And when they get around to inquiring about the Lord, he told them what the problem was. And so they corrected that, but they're licking their wounds. And after reflection, they've come to look upon the calamity as discipline from God. That's the way they're viewing it. If we'd have done what we should have done, we wouldn't be here. And so they're going to make a correction. And as they describe what God has allowed to happen, they picture themselves as rejected of God, broken by God, and recipients of God's anger. In other words, he's given them over to their selfish ways and allowed them to suffer the inevitable results of going down that path. You see a lot of that happening today, right? I was encouraged, however, seeing an article where there's a lady of some note, I don't know her, but she was talking about, writing about the advantage of two parents in a home. Now, you wouldn't think you would need to write a book about that. But I'm here to tell you that there's a place for a mama and a daddy in a home. And if you want to get the best results, that's the way that needs to be done. I have a friend who is a lady, and she grew up without her dad. And she had some friends, she told me one time, fussing about their old man, and she's pretty much a little spitfire of a woman. And she told them they need to shut their mouth because they know what they're talking about. She said, you don't know what it's like to grow up just with one, and that one being nearly overwhelmed by what's happened to them. And so there's XX, XY, male and female. And so God has decreed, so it is. And lo and behold, shock of shocks, that works best. And so one of the great things we can do before the community is live together with our spouses in peace and harmony, and thank God for any children that he blesses that union with, and raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord without a lot of confusion and brouhaha going on. And the community that's in a disastrous situation will certainly see that. You know, you go to our urban areas and you have a lot of angry young men. What do they need? They need their daddy. It's exactly what they need. It takes men do a good job, when they're the right kind of men, civilizing young males. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but they tend to be a little more aggressive than the females do. And so they have to have some help. Now, during the Vietnam conflict, a lot of boys, they were delayed in their home of birth, but once they got to Fort Polk, Louisiana, there's a guy with a Smokey Bear hat on that would inculcate some of that into them and pulled a lot of them back from the brink as far as their discipline and all of that. But some of the things that we see now are just a result of the absence of fathers in the home. Particularly black preachers that preach in those urban areas have been saying that for nearly 100 years, telling people, you know, daddies need to step up. Men needs to be a man. You know, you need to put a ring on your baby's mama. If you put a ring on her finger, and on her and on that child, if you want to be a man. But they're broken. I don't know what their infraction was, but they've not been taking care of business. The New American Standard says, "You have broken us." The word means to burst or to break forth upon us, to scatter us. Now that they've felt the pain of their failure, what they do next, and what do they seek? I mean, a nation, as a nation, they make one basic request: "Oh, restore us." The word means to return. They are asking God to turn them back to Him. They need restoration. They need restoration to His fellowship, restoration to His protection, restoration of His. Did I say leadership? And that needs to come back to them. And they want God to fight for them once more and renew their successes. And so the plea is the heart thrust. That is the heart thrust of this song. It doesn't relate that their defeat came because of their sinfulness. He doesn't say that. We don't know what it was. However, they imply it is as they ask God to return them to Him. In other words, it had to have been some infraction, or they would not be now divorced from Him, separate from Him. And that their request is, return us back. God always blesses His people and never forsakes them. Why would God withdraw His help if not because of Israel's apostasy? Why would God be displeased with His nation and chastise them if not for disobedience? So he's not a vindictive person. A safe assumption is to say that they've sinned in some way, and suffered God's discipline. To their credit, they've learned from it and are now seeking restoration to the Lord. That's all you can do when you go off into far country. What did the prodigal do? Remember? You got a Jewish boy slopping hogs. That's something no self-respecting Jew's going to do. But that's what he's down to. And the text says he comes to himself. You know, in my Father's house, His servants are doing better than I am. And what does he do? He says, I'll go back. I'll go back. I'll fess up to my Father, and I will ask Him to just let me be one of His hired servants. And that's what he did. He worked like a slave for the next 50 years, right? Now, when he approaching his home, his daddy's out there looking for him. And that's what a dad would do. And he runs to meet him, and there's a restoration in their fellowship. So their shattering experience is described Israel's as earth-shaking and traumatic. You have made the land quake. You have split it open. Heal its breaches, for it totters. So deeply did the Jewish nation feel this disaster that it took the psalmist 7 expressions to get said what he felt under the inspiration of the Spirit needed to be said. And what had happened to them as a result of whatever this infraction is. He says, you have rejected us. You have broken us. You have been angry. You have made the land quake. You have split it open. You have made your people experience hardship. You have given us wine to drink that causes us to stagger. And so these phrases contain vivid, pointed metaphors. Israel had been cast off. They'd been rejected like a dirty garment or a worn-out garment that's tossed aside. And the people have been broken. As when a protective wall around a city is breached and the enemy begins to make entrance. And so they've been breached, and the tragedy they had experienced is comparable to an earthquake that had caused the earth to tremble and crack. I've only been through two earthquakes. I don't like them. I just remember in class one morning in Guatemala City, you had the tremor, and I looked outside the door, and the power lines were doing that, and had my total focus, even though there's nothing you can do about it. You know, in an environment like that you're not in charge. Somebody else is in charge. And so they've been through something like that, and a divine hand, the writer believes, will be required to fix what's wrong and to replace what's been vacated and to return their hearts to wholeness, to regroup their forces and heal the nation and return to its former status. But here he is making the attempt. He doesn't make any excuses. He does not equivocate. He just fesses up and asks God to take them back. There's a lesson there for us, isn't there? Sometimes that only needs to be done in private, because whatever occurred was in private. But sometimes it is cleansing and worthwhile to ask the church to be with you as you go before the Lord and make a confession like this. The people have gone through great disillusionment and hardship, verse 3. And it is if they have been rendered incapable by a drug potion of some kind. And so they had staggered or reeled under the load that was too heavy for them. And these figures stress God's displeasure with them and pictures them as being bereft without his strong hand in battle and in life. That's a scary place to be. No thoughtful, rational person would want to be there. In verse 4, on the encouraging side of it, in their remorse, they could see that they, along with all other believers, had been given a banner. You have given a banner to those who fear you, that it may be displayed because of the truth. The meaning of that sentence seems to be that God has given them a banner around which they can rally and take their stand with that for his truth. They carry standards used to when they just lined up on either side of a field and run together, armies did. Well, then they would rally to their banner sometimes if they got separated and things were not going well. They would make a push to get everybody to rally to the commander or rally to the banner. And so it's that kind of imagery. And the image of this insignia over their heads symbolizes God's word and his fidelity and his righteousness and his goodness. In a time of national disaster, nothing was more important for the Israelites than to come together under a new resolve to be faithful to the Lord. After 9/11, do you remember what happened at churches? Yeah, there's a lot of folks showed up. Where are they? You say, that was good. That was good. But you want to maintain commitment to the covenants that you make, especially with the Lord. This past week, we celebrated 47 years of marriage. Best decision I ever made. And as long as he'll let us stay here together, that just suits me fine. But you have to commit yourself to do that. And there's some in here that have been married a lot longer than that. Dessa Fenter used to like to point out how much longer they'd been married than we had. And we said, well, we didn't get started quite as soon as y'all did. That was what, number 2? I shall stop there. I hope to see you next time, Lord willing. Thank you for being here.